podcast with a K.
Hello, I'm Christian Cawley. That's James McLean. As you know, this is a podcast with a K, and we're here to discuss the brand new, awesome new Doctor Who trailer. And as a reminder, here it is right now.
This is the gateway to everything that ever was, or ever can be.
It's like a
Spaceship. What?
That is a robot. It speaks emoji. Mars.
1814.
Get it!
Nice here, isn't it?
So how do we stay out of trouble?
This is naughty.
Exterminate.
Something's coming, Bill. And I have the feeling that we're going to be very busy.
It's time.
Doctor.
Bring it. You're about to be exposed to the vacuum of space. This is the moment you've been waiting for since the day you were born. Now, Dole, Bill, with me to the TARDIS.
So that's the Doctor Who Series 10 trailer. It's come out on the 13th of March, which is roughly a month before the series starts on Easter Saturday on April the 15th. And it looks like a very nice trailer with lots of... It's clearly been, those are scenes that have been well chosen. There's lots of nice things going on in there that give pretty much zero away, other than the fact that we've got Daleks, Ice Warriors, Emoji Robot, Missy, and a few other bits and bobs in there. How did it strike you, James?
I have two hats here.
Okay.
I have one hat which is a trilby sort of thing.
Is one a fedora?
Trilby. Yeah, fedora more. And I have a flat cap as well. And I'm deciding which one to wear. Do I wear the flat cap?
That sounds like it should be mine.
It should be, yeah, but these days, we sort of branched out, haven't we? We've now absorbed cultures from the limited cultures from the north and the into the south. I have a flat cap, right, which I think denotes my honest feeling, or I have my trilby fedora, which is sort of more my kind of objective feeling. And I don't know which one to wear first. I'm going to go with the trilby because I think we are very critical. My objective feeling is I think, yes, it's a good trailer. I think it was nicely cut together. There was lots of variety in it. It was, as you say, it was non-specific, so it had you guessing. It didn't give you a real narrative to it. So that was good as well. Yeah, it looked interesting, didn't it?
Yeah, it does. There's lots in there. You could sit there and dissect the entire thing for an entire podcast, and dare say some other Doctor Who podcasts will do exactly that. I think the landscapes look nice. I think Doctor Who's finally got over its high definition reluctance to go to alien planets.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose. Nice.
I thought there was a few things in there which were quite nice. It still feels very fan orientated. Things like there's the Easter egg of the Baker's sonic screwdriver, and there is still a lot of callbacks. It's still very fan focused, which isn't. I'm actually not wearing my other hat yet. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's something as an observed and may sort of carry on. I may have to wear both hats at the same time. Actually, in fact, I think I will.
I think that can.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's kind of good because you're appealing to different audiences, but it does feel like there's a lot of callbacks there. It's as if it's still hanging on a lot of its coattails.
Well, are we getting over obsessed with that fourth Doctor sonic screwdriver? Because the majority of people won't know what that is. The vast overwhelming majority of people won't know what that is unless they've seen it in Forbidden Planet or whatever. So if he just tosses it over and it's not mentioned again, he just looks at it, glances,
but that's what I'm kind of thinking. I mean, your trailer there, that trailer's there to be sort of trying to bring in the millions who don't watch Doctor Who anymore. And yet that moment, beyond it, unless you think the Matt Lucas catching it is really quite a cool moment, which you might, it does feel like it's aimed at fans. And you think, really? Are they the people you should be aiming this trailer at? Shouldn't you be aiming it at that sort of broader audience, which has gone away? But then they might argue it doesn't make a difference. It's a nice moment. He catches something. It looks exciting and fans will get it and it will give them interest. But there still seems a lot for fans in there this season, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying it's, again, wearing both hats: Cybermen, Ice Warriors, Sonic Screwdrivers, Daleks again. There are some interesting things which, it seemed, because our concern was that the show's got a little too inward facing, and it doesn't really feel like this season is looking any different, although the promotions and the promotional material for this and their how they're pedestaling it is quite the opposite. Well, sort of. Again, I'm wearing both hats. They've sort of said that it's like back to basics. We're going back to the original, that you can watch the first episode of this and it will be like watching Rose. It will be the first episode you ever have to watch. We're going back to what Doctor Who is about. And you think, but that sounds good. But is it still just going back to Doctor Who that these old things that the old people liked? Is it still forward moving? And I will find out. But I think it's a good trailer. If I take the trilby off and just wear my flat cap, though, there was a lot of I just don't care anymore there, which is, as I say, is not perhaps very critical. But I think after 5 years of being quite disappointed with some of the material, I've just left at the point where it's like it's another trailer. Well, you can make anything look good.
Yeah. Well, this is what I was going to move on to, because I do wonder whether there could have been the best way to put this really is that Series 10 of Doctor Who in a nutshell there, or is there something else going on? Because, we've had Bad Wolf, we've had The Master, we've had Torchwood, we've had the Fairy Tale universe and the Big Bang, we've had the Business with River Song and the Silence Must Fall and all that nonsense, and all these different methods of tying things together. And then the last season, there was very little along those lines at all. Season before that, there was the utter bump of Clara and Clara's boyfriend. I suppose last season there's a bit coming in with the Time Lords and what have you, but nothing sort of particularly heavy. And I did wonder, it's just a series of clips. And would that not, if there is something along those lines, then would a trailer just, to just get some of that 2005 flavoured buzz. Just stick something in there that's actually calling out to the fans, but then only like 3 or 4 people notice it, and then they mention it in forums, they mention it on Twitter, mentions on Facebook, snowballs, and all of a sudden everyone's talking about an overarching storyline that's rather oblique, that is not specifically mentioned.
Well, perhaps there is no overarching story.
Exactly, that's what I say. Perhaps there isn't, and it's we've said before, maybe we've moved away from overarching storylines. Maybe Doctor Who could try telling us a series-long story, as many shows are these days.
It's the model of streaming, isn't it, at the moment?
Well, exactly, yeah, and a lot of people are watching Doctor Who that way, or is it, as it would appear to be, and I say appear, not appear to be from the trailer, just a series of one-part stories, perhaps some two-part stories, keeping that traditional Doctor Who episodic nature. And, it looks like that is all it is. A very sort of, possibly a back-to-basics approach to Doctor Who, maintaining that episodic Doctor Who, and which makes me immediately kind of think of Broadchurch. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm particularly enjoying the current season of Broadchurch. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't think it carries the same delivery or urgency to watch it as the first series does. It seems to be better than the second series so far. But it is an ongoing storyline and written and produced by the next Doctor Who producer. Do you think the BBC would be interested in getting rid of the episodic format of Doctor Who and going towards that kind of?
I don't know. Could be.
Because
I don't know.
The other thing is that we've been given the suggestion that this series of Doctor Who, Series 10 of Doctor Who, is going to be on at a later time, which would therefore not preclude Doctor Who from taking a more episodic nature less episodic nature, beg your pardon, this time around. It's all very much. I have similar feelings to you, but from a completely different point of a different angle. I mean, this late screening for Doctor Who Series 10, and we had a brief exchange about this on Skype before the podcast. I'm less inclined to watch it with my 5-year-old if it's going to be on at 8 o'clock. I mean, I review everything, every Doctor Who or every movie or whatever that we watch together before we watch it, to avoid any unfavourable questions or unsuitable scenes or whatever. And that goes for Doctor Who as well. But if something's on at 8 o'clock, I'm inclined to just not bother reviewing it and not bother watching it with him. Because that 8 o'clock is not a time for family TV.
Yeah. No, it's a difficult one. I think it will go back to being the 5 o'clock. I think what is interesting is, as I always said in our preempt before we came on, was how it feels as if Moffat's trying to preempt the gift that Chibnall has, and that's to sort of say, I'm starting again. And I'm not quite sure the logic behind this. This season seems to be about sort of trying to say we're not doing the same as before, we're doing something different, even though the trappings seem to be very similar as the time before, which is odd. You know, we've got this influx of old canon that's in there. The companion seems very similar mold to previous companions. Structurally, I imagine it's going to be very much the same. The time slot, as you say, Christian, pretty much the same. And yet he's trying to sell it as if this is a step back and this is a new Who before the official new era starts. And I'm just trying to get my head what he's doing there. I mean, is this intentional? Is this to try and aid, to try and return to viewers? Is this ego? Is it the fact that he knows the next person gets to start afresh and he has to do it first, or he has to kickstart that?
Let's think about it this way. The next 3 years ago, he would have known that the next person gets to choose how Doctor Who continues beyond his 12th regeneration, and he decided to take that gig. Yeah. So...
No. Makes you wonder. I mean, I'm trying to wear both caps. I'm trying to say, no, I'm not definitely sure it's that, but it does feel a bit like that. It feels like the same stuff, but sold under this idea that he's kickstarting a new era, which then Chibnall will carry on, rather than Chibnall kickstarting a new era and Moffat finishing what he's already, you know, the sort of style that he's been enjoying, and some have enjoyed. I don't know which it is. I'm kind of hoping it's part of a strategy, and it's not ego, and it is a strategy that the BBC, that he is aware that they need to make obvious changes to resell this. But like you say, the fact it's on at 8 o'clock strikes it as very much more of the same to me. For it to be on at 8 would suggest to me the BBC think it needs to be on at 8. I don't believe this. I don't subscribe to this, that the BBC just doesn't care and puts it on at 8. I think the BBC, if it could, it would put it on earlier because it knows that's where the audiences are for this sort of show.
Yeah, the BBC isn't going to put a show that it doesn't care about on at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, well, yeah, 8 being eight's a good 8 for any other show is a good time. I'm not saying 8's a bad time, but for a show which is meant to have a child focus for children, it's not a very good time. So why is it on at 8? Why has it been decided that's the time slot for it? Especially when there's all talk that Chibnall's will be on earlier. So I don't think it's the BBC. It's either I suspect the content is still much like before, but I don't know. I mean, the trailer was hard to discern on that sort of factor. But yeah, I'm still feeling at the moment I want to be impressed, and I think the only way I'll be impressed is actually seeing good stuff rather than
being impressed.
Because we've seen so many times, sometimes you can cut a good trailer and it can be brilliant, and then you can see what the trailer's about, and that can be brilliant too. But more often than not, you know, a trailer will either feel different to the film. It'll either feel better than the film or worse than the film or the television show. So it doesn't really indicate any sort of... I mean, all the trailers can look kind of cool, can't they? You throw in a few explosions, a few alien landscapes, a couple of quirky one-liners, and you make a good trailer. Well... But how does that translate into sort of like almost 10 hours worth of television? I don't know. Is there any of the designs that impresses you or doesn't? I'm not over impressed with the Ice Warrior. What's about you?
I thought the Ice Warrior looked a bit pink, to be honest with you, in the skin area.
Yeah, it just didn't look very stylish. It looked a bit. I don't know. Again, maybe I'm just stuck on old designs, but I kind of liked how they're either bulky or they were quite slender and aesthetic.
I think it's an Ice Queen, isn't it? So it's supposed to be an Ice Warrior Queen
Yeah.
or something like that.
So I don't know. It doesn't
The
really.
emoji bot feels similar to the robots from the other place that was the other story that was all white.
The girl who waits.
The Girl Who Waited, yeah.
Yeah, I felt that as well.
I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. It certainly
No,
evokes
I've
that.
heard
It was a good story.
I've heard people sort of go, "Oh my God, emoji bots, I give up." But Doctor Who has always, to some degree, reflected the times, and emojis are heavily part of our time. So I don't really have an issue with the
people who
idea.
don't understand emojis saying this?
Sorry?
I said, is it possibly people who don't understand emojis?
I think it's older people who just kind of feel it's riffing off young people stuff. But
Yeah,
again,
like troll dolls.
Doctor Who's always, it's always done a bit of that though.
Yeah.
It's always had a little bit of. So yeah, it feels perhaps a bit on the nose, but I'm not going to knock it for that. It'll be interesting. The one thing I will be very interested in is whether, as Moffat sort of has alluded to, and whether we'll find it's true or not, that when he whisks Bill off from her chippery or wherever, that it is like ongoing adventures. There's no sort of base where they come back to where she lives her life and then jumps in. I get the impression it's meant to be a living on the TARDIS, which could be interesting.
Be a nice change.
Well, it's something we've sort of suggested for a while.
Because, I mean, if we go back to... the last time anyone lived on the TARDIS was 2010, wasn't it? After that, Rory and Amy had their own house, didn't they?
Yeah, so it was a very short-lived living on the TARDIS.
Clara had her own house, or flat, or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. They've all had sort of domestication. So if this is purely just someone being on trip, that would be quite interesting. I like the sound of that.
Yeah. If anyone hasn't seen it, obviously you probably will have seen the trailer to hear us talk about it. But if you haven't seen it, you can catch it on YouTube. We'll put it in the show notes. There's also another nice trailer, which is Michelle Gomez as Missy and the head of a Cyberman watching the trailer. It's a bit of fun, and she makes some nice comments that I could totally see Anthony Ainley making. It's a nice. I mean, it's only like a minute long, or whatever. It's not the full trailer. I don't think, but it's a nice little bit of fun. Going back to that topic of time slots and perhaps how Doctor Who is viewed and interpreted in terms of sophistication. I wonder whether we talk a lot about the 1990s, Doctor Who in the 1990s, and new adventures, and how the people that were involved with the new adventures, writing them, have kind of, or some of them, have come to prominence in modern Doctor Who. Russell T Davies,
right.
Paul Cornell, Gareth Roberts. Now, none of those are involved with the show now, but I do wonder whether, I mean, Doctor Who then, it wasn't for children. I wonder whether that ethos isn't the right word, but that approach to Doctor Who, making Doctor Who more sophisticated and perhaps confusing sophistication with adults. Do you think something's happened there in how Doctor Who is written, that it's kind of eschewed its previous... I mean, since it came back, it started at 7 o'clock, it dropped back to sort of like the 6:30 area, came back up to sort of 7-ish o'clock. It's never been, it's never been a 5:30, 5:45 show for many, many years, other than Christmas Day. Has something happened to Doctor Who, how it is written, do you think?
That's an interesting question, because, I mean, that era was in response to adults pretty much owning the show, wasn't it, as you could say? The adults.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose so. They sort of they embraced the show, they sort of acquired it almost and made it into something which the show itself in the 80s was struggling with. They obviously felt that it needed to sort of have a darker or yeah, so I suppose as they were growing up, they felt they wanted to make the show more for them and for people like them because the kids were no longer watching it. I suppose that was the logic. And then they acquire the show as a television, to some degree, we say acquire, and through Big Finish as well. And yeah, there is a shift in tone. It could be. I think it's interesting when you see things like the Lego Movie, though, and you think of Pixar, and you think of how you can do something which is family, which I think Doctor Who would always be more violent than that sort of thing. But there is a tone that you can hit where you can be adult without being no longer available for kids. And yeah, I do wonder whether the show's sort of kind of missing that area and why it's missing. I sometimes wonder whether the show needs to be, I don't know. It's a tough one. It's a podcast in itself.
It is really, I suppose. Yeah.
How do you make a show which is family focused that touches everyone? And are there examples of Doctor Who doing that since 2005? Or examples of Big Finish, because sometimes you could say Big Finish hits the tone of old Doctor Who, but sometimes Big Finish can be quite violent or very visceral in its alienness when it creates its creatures and the like. So it's difficult to say. I mean, do you think is there any show, okay, because you've got kids, is there any particular episode that you think is indicative of a sort of family episode which appeals to everyone? And we're not talking like the Christmas episode that just gone, which was sort of very childishly superhero, because I don't think that really appealed to adults.
No, it didn't,
I mean, I'd like to think, to be honest, I'm going to pick one from Moffat recently, because, as I say, we do criticize Zero quite a lot. Things like Time Heist.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Possibly, yeah. I was thinking
mix.
more along a Dalek adventure, probably.
Dalek. First Dalek one, surely, to some degree.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking of that series end of season 2-parter, or the following series end of season 2-parter. Those are good ones to sit with the family and watch.
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem is that fans always want that little bit more, don't they? And obviously things like Pixar, Disney, they give as well. They give those little Easter eggs. And I think, when you think back to the sort of Eccleston-Tennant era, if you had any reference to a previous canon thing, it was pounced on. It was exciting. And maybe that was the best way to do it. So you had these little moments. But they weren't massive. And again, going back to Time Heist, you do have that nice moment where they're going through the criminal files and you get a few back. You get Absalom Duck appears for a second. And so you do have that little bit, but it's not entrenched in the actual show. And maybe that's always the good family way, not because continuity is poisonous, but because continuity can sometimes perhaps way down a story to a point where it can no longer be that sort of balance for new and old watchers. Maybe that's why sort of stories which aren't very heavy in continuity sometimes carry that the best. And perhaps also the ones, I still think episodic ones work the best if we're looking at family. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love Utopia and the Utopia trilogy. Yeah. But in its own way, it's probably not the best sort of family viewing as, say, the Human Nature one was, in the sense the Human Nature is quite a nice rounded story. It's got a slight fairy tale aspect to it. It's got an interesting character point to it. The antagonists are interesting.
It's a bit dark in places as well. And I think in terms of my family, for 5-year-olds, trying to introduce the topic of institutionalized racism in a world where such a thing doesn't exist is quite difficult. So that's not really something I've attempted to watch with the children, because of Martha's experience. That would be quite difficult to in places that might be quite difficult to deal with. It's probably not. It's probably not as specific as I'm thinking. Thinking it is. Actually, but it's certainly not one we've got to watch yet, anyway.
I'm just thinking that, how much of it, when we look at it in that sort of ways, is it us putting adult eyes on kids? I'm just thinking, when I'm a kid, how many things that I would have overlooked in, Are You Being Served?
Yeah.
How many of the jokes there, and we're not even just talking about the one-liners, we're talking even about the characters. Humphrey's character, for instance, do kids really sort of understand the social commentaries there? But yeah, no, I see your point. I think it's a good point, and this may be one that they need to consider more. I kind of feel the episodes where they try and go darker of late have not really worked.
Such as?
What was the Sandman one?
Oh yeah,
I can't remember what it's called. I know it's an obvious
Sleep No More.
Sleep No More. And the one underwater as well, which wasn't too bad. It was a bit run of the mill, but ultimately I did feel it was trying very hard to scare the audience. It was trying to create these ghosts which would scare kids behind the sofa, as if there's this. I sometimes wonder if that's sometimes Doctor Who's mistake at the moment. Rather than it being a sort of interesting ride, that it constantly tries to be the scare ride, that it has this legacy. And I wonder whether Doctor Who's mistake, and I include this in the classic series as well, was this idea that once it became known as behind the sofa, that's what it had to do all the time. And I thought, well, maybe it doesn't. I remember watching Doctor Who as a kid. I didn't actually enjoy going behind the sofa. The Vervoids freaked me out as a kid, I remember, for various reasons. But I didn't enjoy hiding behind the sofa from it. I know some people do. But I just wonder whether that sort of legacy is what sort of makes it sometimes a bit hard to find that balance, because it's got this legacy that's got to be frightening. I think, does it have to be frightening? I'm not sure it does.
I was more of a cushion person, to be honest with you.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like Time Heist, I enjoy, but I don't. The Minotaur essentially in that episode is quite a nasty creature, not in itself, but in its power. And it adds a layer of suspense, which is good. But to me, when I look back at Time Heist, I forget about it. That's not important to the story. You could have got rid of that creature and that has still been an enjoyable story. So obviously it'd have lost its point at the end. But do you see what I mean? The horror wasn't what made it. And I sometimes wonder maybe that's an issue there, that Doctor Who does focus too much on the horror, and it shouldn't. It should, if it is naturally scary for kids, and that's great, but I don't think it should be trying to be, and I think sometimes it's trying sometimes too hard.
You mentioned just as a brief adjunct, you did mention Before the Flood and Under the Lake there, and of course the actor who played the Fisher King, Neil Fingleton, or one of the actors who played the Fisher King, the person in the suit, passed away a few days ago.
Oh right.
So he was. He wasn't very old either. He was a very tall chap, which is why I was picked for the part. He was 7'7", and he died on the 25th of February, aged just 36. He was a basketball player as well, and he was from the northeast of England, as am I. Just to fill in the gaps there, Peter Serafinowicz, which I can normally pronounce without any issue, so I'll try again. Peter Serafinowicz was the voice of the Fisher King, and rock singer Corey Taylor was the roar of the Fisher King. Corey Taylor, you may know from the group Slipknot. Or you may not.
Or you may not.
Winding it back then to the Series 10 trailer. It's fast-paced, there's alien locations, there's classic series monsters. There's everything there that makes a good Doctor Who trailer, and I move my head away from the microphone as I do this, so I'll stop doing that now. There's everything there that makes a good Doctor Who trailer. We don't know until we watch the episode if it is, or the series, if it is an appropriate reflection of the 10 episodes, 12 episodes, I beg your pardon, that are set to come along in Series 10. But I do wonder whether or not have we perhaps, the two of us, maybe the three of us with Brian as well, maybe even with one of our regular guests, Gareth, in some ways, because he focuses all his energies in a very particular portion of Doctor Who. I wonder if there's actually, and this follows on from what we were talking about last time, I think, although I'm not sure whether that was actually made into the podcast or not. But I do, have we reached a kind of a new state of appreciation of Doctor Who, which we might, for instance, call Post-Fandom.
Oh, right. So they're talking about whether we're fans or critics. Oh, I think it depends who you talk to. Still a lot of people who are happy to embrace and own the title of fan. I think it's an interesting argument and debate to be made about post-fandom, about whether that will carry more, or does carry, or perhaps it always has done, or maybe it will once again. Maybe fandom will carry less value. It sort of gained cultural value, didn't it? As did the words geek and nerd. But so far as shows go, yeah, I don't know. I mean, fandom is obviously fanatic, it's expression, it's emotive. But I think the irony is that by its nature of being interested in something, you're also inherently critical, even if you're positively critical. As much as people say squee, people behind the squee will have reasons, or they will want a reason why they enjoyed something. And fan and being objectively critical is not synonymous, really. Not in my head. As ideas, they can be, but I don't think as concepts they really sort of sit together well. So yeah, I think you're right. I think there is an interesting thing at the post fandom, and whether that again would reflect back on the show, whether people will have had so much sort of fan focus in the last 6-7 years of Doctor Who, to include a bit of Russell's as well. Actually not much of Russell's at all. God, it's been going on a while. That we want something different, that we want something which isn't so aware of itself, which does something which is got some sort of critical balance to it, that it's structured, that it feels like it flows, that it doesn't feel like it's overly confusing or weighed down by things which are unnecessary. I think one of the things, as you said, Christian, is to go one of two ways, either to go entirely episodic or to go entirely series structured. So it's a story throughout the whole series. I don't think the middle ground works.
No. Well, I mean, I've been watching a few shows lately. I mean, I've been watching. I'm struggling with some of them. For instance, I still haven't made it past sort of episode 6 of the first series of Gotham, whereas I've recently got halfway through the first series of The Man in the High Castle. Game of Thrones. I'm fully up to date with Game of Thrones, and I'm waiting for July to come round. And I desperately want Doctor Who to be the conversation on a Monday morning of people. I mean, I haven't worked in a physical office with physical colleagues for 7 years. Nearly 7, 6.5 years, 7. But I desperately want Doctor Who to be that conversation. But the way I see it at the moment, Doctor Who isn't that conversation. It's not doing what it needs to do to be that conversation. And it doesn't need to be an overarching thing, because if you just go back to 2006, and I think Gareth Cavan and I are going to do a coaxial on this at some point. Life on Mars was the conversation on a Monday morning. And that was... that had a small overarching storyline as to how Sam Tyler got there, but every week it was almost purely episodic, with an occasional, where am I sort of thing thrown in. And Doctor Who's not being that conversation, and if you're not being that conversation, then a series with Doctor Who's legacy, that's not good, I don't believe.
Well, I kind of found in Series 8 where you get some interesting episodes, like going back to Time Heist or Mummy on the Orient Express, and then you bookend it with Missy stealing someone's soul. To me, that takes away from the story. Mm-hmm. And on Monday morning, it gives them less to talk about in a weird way, because the only thing people might talk about is who this Missy person is. And it sort of trumps the actual 45 minutes that you've had, which otherwise might be the thing that people are talking about in more detail because there's more to discuss.
This is called back to things that you've said on many occasions about having a good ending. Because people will remember the ending. If you have a bad ending, people remember it, even if the beginning and the middle were brilliant. If you have a great ending, the beginning and middle weren't top notch or were poor, then that doesn't matter because you remembered a great ending. And if you're then bookending a great ending with Missy talking to someone in a garden, then that's what the conversation is.
Yeah. So think on, Doctor
Who. Think on indeed. We bring you this podcast as an emergency update to discuss the new trailer and what we think about it and where we feel it hits and misses and takes Doctor Who. It is, of course, purely speculation, and we hope that it holds you in good stead and helps you to keep yourself robust, and it perhaps even gird your loins before our next podcast, which will be out in a few days' time, in which James McLean and Gareth Kavanagh discuss a particularly popular cult movie from the 1980s. We will be back in a flash. Until next time, it's goodbye.
This is a BeyondKasterborous podcast, available on iTunes, Audio Boom, Stitcher.com, Player FM, and BeyondKasterborous.com.